All right, so have you ever heard of Marburg virus?
No.
Well, that kind of makes sense since it's really rare and there's only about 600, a little less, known cases since its discovery in 1967. So I'm assuming the answer is no, but have you ever heard of any of the characteristics associated with this type of virus?
No.
Okay. So basically, and also another question I have is, do you know the difference between a bacteria and a virus?
Just re-ask that question.
So first of all, do you know the difference between a bacteria and a virus?
No.
So basically, a bacteria is living, and then a virus is a non-living type of organism. So basically, it's made up of its nucleic acids, and it's surrounded by a capsid, and then sometimes it's surrounded by another membrane called an envelope. So with this one, it does have a capsid, and it does have an envelope. And then one more question would be, do you know where in the world this might be most kind of prevalent?
No.
Well, that would be in Africa.
So, because it's found in Africa, where like the virus is found, like its main source is in fruit bats. So it's found in fruit bats that you can find in caves in Africa. So do you know if it was found in bats, how it might get from a bat to a human?
No.
So they actually don't know how that happens. They just know that people will go into these caves with the bats, and then they come out and they've come down with the virus. So then once a person has it, how do you think it would get from one person to another?
Any type of contact with another person?
Yeah, so it's from bodily fluids, so blood or saliva, that kind of thing. And could you guess what kind of illness it would cause?
No.
So it causes a hemorrhagic fever. So you get lots of internal bleeding, and then once the disease progresses, you get multi-system organ failure.
So since this type of disease that Marburg virus causes, would you have any idea maybe about how you might go about treating this? So the problem actually with Marburg virus is that there are no known treatments as of right now. Basically, it's just kind of treating the side effects. So you have major blood loss, which means major fluid loss. So you're going to kind of use oral and IV rehydration therapy, and maybe kind of treat the other symptoms like the fever, etc., kind of as needed. But there's basically nothing that can actually cure the fever itself that the virus causes. And then, have you ever heard of any of maybe lab research treatments that they're kind of working on in the lab? Would you have any guesses as to what those might be?
No.
So the experimental treatments that they're working on right now are on antibodies. Do you know what antibodies are?
No.
So that the body makes antibodies to combat pathogens that get into the body. So antibodies are kind of what protects you in your immune system from something that gets in that shouldn't be in there. So they're working on antibody treatments, and they're doing that in mice and some primates, like monkeys, things like that. But they haven't found anything solid yet that works. And a lot of that is because it's really, really contagious. So they need a level 4 containment facility to do this research, and that requires a lot of biohazard precautions. So it can be really expensive, and most labs aren't equipped to do that. So research is really hard. So because it's a really infectious disease and it has a lot of bad outcomes, would you guess that it has a good survival rate?
Probably not.
Yeah, so the mortality rate is between 50 and 90%, which is really, really high. So how would you guess that we would prevent this disease?
Avoid bat caves.
Yeah.
I mean, consider it is coming from the same family as Ebola. So if you know anything about like Ebola, you might lead you to maybe thinking about what you would do to prevent Marburg virus as well. Have you ever heard of Ebola?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about it, like severity-wise?
Most people die from it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, like, to prevent it, you basically just the people who are treating those infected will wear a lot of PPE, so personal protective equipment. So, like, they'll be gowned up when interacting with the patients. They'll have gloves on. They'll have masks on. They'll be isolated from other individuals in the hospital to kind of protect other people who might come into contact with this patient otherwise.
Do you have any questions about the disease?
No. Is there like studies on like right now going on how to like treat this disease?
So they are working on the treatments, but because it's not super prevalent, it's not like on the forefront of research right now because there are so few cases. They don't have any vaccines or anything like that. I'm guessing that if it started to spread more, there would be more money in the research for it. But right now, there's not a lot.
So today we are here with the medical microbiology students Tori and Molly to talk about Marburg.
Okay. So basically, first of all, this virus is basically known to come from Africa. And so the reservoir in Africa that kind of has this virus would be the fruit bats, which are found in caves and also in mines. And so basically, we don't really know how it gets transmitted from the bats to humans, which is, it's kind of like actually accidental transmission. However, it does actually happen, and then it can sometimes occur with monkeys and other types of primates as well. So did you guys have anything else about transmission at all?
One thing that we have found is that the aerosols from feces in the bats, that's how it can be transmitted from humans. That's one way, that's what we found.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. And
then the pathophysiology of the virus is kind of simple when you look at it. The virus needs NPC1 in order to enter the cell. So there's been studies done that if it doesn't have NPC1, then it cannot enter and it can infect the cells. But when it does infect the cells, it gets into the liver and that's where it replicates. So it increases liver enzymes. And then it eventually spreads to other organs and it becomes like systemic and it's really hard to treat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we found that it was linear. It had linear negative sense RNA. So it was single-stranded. So then once it gets into the cells, it has to be converted to positive sense in order to be like replicated and produce more of the virus within the body. And it has a capsid as well as an envelope, which I'm sure you guys found when you looked into it as well.
So actually, one important thing about the envelope, which kind of makes it more virulent and allows it to get into the body, is the spike proteins or the glycoproteins 1 and 2, which are on its surface, which kind of helps with the patho, which you mentioned.
okay. Awesome.
And we kind of went into a little detail about person-to-person transmission too. We had that it could be from kind of any of the bodily fluids, even like tissues from the individual, and other secretions could be like blood from contaminated needles maybe. I don't know if you had anything, because we didn't actually come across anything with the feces, but that's really interesting. I don't know if you had anything else with that.
We definitely found some of the stuff like you were talking about how it can be transmitted through like tissue. A lot of the times, like I know that in some of our research we found that once the person passes away from the virus, they actually have to like wrap them in plastic and they like bury them way down deep because it can still be transmitted once they've passed away. So that's one thing that we came across. And then obviously like you were talking about bodily fluids, so you have to use like the right equipment if you know somebody has it to make sure that you don't spread it to yourself or other people.
And so obviously we found the disease that it caused, so the hemorrhagic fever, and then it's really, really difficult to treat. There aren't a lot of treatments for it, and we really only saw anything about oral rehydration, IV rehydration. I don't know if you guys found anything else about that.
Basically, what we have found about the treatment for Marburg is just to keep the patient comfortable. You want to use different techniques, pain, you want to use, make sure that they're hydrated. Another thing that we also learned about in our nursing classes is complementary and alternative therapy, so maybe distracting the client and trying to get the patient and keep their mind away from what's really going on with this Marburg virus, where it's so deadly.
Okay, so as far as like the experimental treatments that we kind of heard about, a lot of them were antibody-based. So they were testing them in mice and some non-human primates, so like different types of monkeys. And they were looking into monoclonal antibodies that were showing to be effective in mice that had been like infected with this in the labs. And then like a polyvalent antiserum, so like multiple antibodies in the serum, so to help like produce antibodies in the human. But as far as like the treatments, nothing was like even close to the stages of being tested in humans at all.
So basically we found that this Marburg virus causes a Marburg hemorrhagic fever. And so as far as we researched, we found that it's like massive hemorrhages, both internal bleeding and external bleeding, and then along with fever. And so that's basically the signs and symptoms that we got into. I don't know if you guys can elaborate on that.
So yeah, a lot of the symptoms that they get are similar to the flu, like muscle aches, chills, fever, like you said. Also, about 5 days after the symptoms start, a rash starts, usually like on their upper body, like trunk area. And then the symptoms usually just continue to keep getting worse and worse.
Since the symptoms are actually very similar to Ebola, the only way to actually identify whether it's Marburg or Ebola is using blood tests. So like something like an ELISA test or a PCR test or a performance chain reaction test would be used, because a lot of people can be misdiagnosed. But also another way that they could do it is after the patient has deceased, they can take a biopsy from the body to test it. And they can also see, because the Marburg virus affects almost all of the organs in the body, you can see all the damage that Marburg has done to it as well.
And this is why patient education is so important, because sometimes it'll be mistaken as just regular flu, so people will brush it off and they'll have a chance to keep on spreading along this virus. So that's why patient education is part of prevention and why it should be done more in places where it's more prevalent.
We also found that because it is so easily transmitted that patients need to be isolated. I wanted to ask you guys like what goes into kind of like the isolation, like how long you would keep a patient isolated after recovery, if you guys have read anything about that.
So we didn't find any specific information on how long they would be isolated. A lot of the information that we found didn't have promising statistics for them. The mortality rate is very high for Marburg virus, but definitely first thing that it is figured out that they have Marburg virus, they would be isolated, and then anybody who enters the room would have to use the right PPE, so using like a gown and a mask and goggles and gloves just to keep themselves protected from any bodily fluids or like when they breathe. So it's really key to just like not have direct contact with them.
This disease is actually, or the virus is actually considered a nosocomial infection because it can be spread throughout the healthcare setting. So anybody that can come in contact with it, so all the healthcare workers, they have to make sure that they are wearing gloves, gown, mask, goggles, all the proper equipment, as well as any family members that come and visit, because the family members can also get infected very easily from this.
I think it's like important to like for the nurses and the staff to learn about like what the signs and symptoms are, so they can get the patient into isolation as quickly as possible to avoid it from spreading anymore.
So other than like the PPE, is there anything else specific for like Marburg virus that would be like you would need to do like for just a patient interaction, like going into the patient's room and checking on them? Is there anything specific to this virus, maybe, that the nurses would have to do?
It's basically the same thing as Ebola, where you have to be in a protective suit that would basically see you off from all contact to any sort of bodily fluids that can come out from the person who's infected.
So extreme.
Extreme.
Very extreme.
That would be the only thing that we could. We didn't really research too much into it, besides the fact that the patient had to be in isolation and proper PPE.
And a lot of the times they die.
Yeah, we also found that it had a really, really high death rate. So it's not something that you want to find yourself in that situation.
Definitely. Alright. Do we have any questions for each other?
I think we asked all of our questions.
I think we're all set, unless you guys have questions for us.
No, we're all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marburg virus. I have not, as a matter of fact. That's interesting. I usually have heard most of that stuff, but go ahead, tell me about it.
It's actually not that surprising because there are 595 total known cases,
Wow.
so it's very rare. So, because you haven't heard of it, I'm guessing you haven't heard, like you wouldn't know any of the characteristics of the virus.
Nope.
So it's in the family Filoviridae, I think is how you say that. And it's a negative sense single-stranded RNA virus, and it has lots of different glycoproteins that help to make it really contagious and really, I guess would you say the word virulent?
Yeah.
Really virulent. So if you had to guess where it was from in the world, where would you guess?
Like, if there's only 500 and something cases, I think like maybe somewhere separate, like New Zealand or maybe Antarctica or Arctic or something. I don't know.
It's from Africa.
It is, okay.
This is a fun game of making you guess things.
Okay.
Do you want to answer?
So, where would you guess, I guess, the virus kind of originates from? Like, what would be the reservoir?
Well, if it's transposed to humans, I'm thinking maybe some sort of primate, like maybe a monkey, chimp, something, baboon or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's
I haven't got anything right yet,
not-
so.
Yeah. It's okay.
100% known, but
Mhm.
right now their best guess is fruit bats,
Oh.
which are kind of
Yep.
like cave-dwelling bats in
Right.
Africa.
Mhm.
They can also be found in mines
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
And then, do you know how this virus kind of gets from the reservoir to the host?
If it's coming from a bat, maybe from eating infected fruit or something like that. If they fed on the fruit, maybe now people start to eat that, or somewhere along the chain, a pig eats it and people eat the pig. I don't know, something like that.
Well,
That's actually a good guess.
actually another problem with this very rare virus. It's actually unknown and is unclear as to how exactly that it gets from reservoir to humans, but the kind of the only linkage that they have right now is that a person visits these caves where the bats inhabit, and then somehow
They come
They-
back with
yeah.
the disease.
and then I guess moving on to the actual host itself, do you know how it would be transmitted from person to person or from host to others?
The only thing I could guess is it's something along saliva or something like that. Maybe it's only blood, because it's a small number, so smaller numbers would indicate it would just be blood, but it's hard to say.
That's exactly right. It's basically from like the bodily fluids and secretions from a person, so like could be blood, like maybe in some infected needles, if you were maybe disposing of this individual's tissue. It can also be transmitted to healthcare workers as well. That would be through the interaction with these secretions and bodily fluids as well.
So, what would you guess that this disease causes? Like what disease it causes?
Marburg. I'm trying to think if I knew somebody named Marburg or something like that. But it's probably the person who discovered it. I would guess it would probably, you're going to always cause fever, malaise, all the things that people run down for having, stimulated the immune system is what I would guess.
Mhm.
Outside of that, I don't know. Does it cause something with skin, lungs, eyes, tissue? I really don't know.
So it causes hemorrhagic fever. It's actually a lot of, if you read up on it, a lot of it is kind of similar to Ebola.
Oh, really?
That whole
nice.
fun scare.
Yeah.
And it's actually, so of the cases that there are, most people don't survive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really, I think it takes usually between I think it's 9 and 20-ish days of disease onset. A lot of people.
Well, they die of it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Because you get liver failure, you get necrosis of organs and multi-system organ failure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very serious disease when you get it.
Right.
And how would you guess that it's treated?
I'm just trying to guess how we would treat most viruses in general. I mean, a lot of times they treat it symptomatically, trying to stop the bleeding, if you will, try to make sure fluid, get the temperature down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they could use any antiviral medications, ribavirin, or any of the other ones that are out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what I'd guess if there was a choice.
Yeah. Basically, every resource just has IV rehydration and things like keeping the temperature down, that kind of stuff. But there is no successful treatment currently.
Mm-hmm.
So there are experimental treatments, which you know a little bit more about, but
Yeah, so basically with the experimental treatments, they're kind of only in lab-infected animals.
Mm-hmm.
So they have done some research with about a lot of antibody-based therapies. And so specifically, I think it was some monoclonal antibodies have been used, and they've kind of been shown to be protective in mice.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, I think it's a polyvalent anti-serum has been shown to be protective in non-human primates. I think it was I don't know
it's
how
like
to
a type
pronounce.
of monkey, chimp, animal.
Not rhesus.
Macaques, I think maybe
Yeah.
it was.
Oh,
called.
yeah.
And so that's about all they have at the moment, and then none of this has progressed far enough to even test it in humans. So therapy is not looking good for this one either. And then another problem with the research is that because it's so similar to Ebola, it does, researching in any lab work requires this biosafety level 4 and maximum containment. So I don't know how many people are very interested in even working with it as well, which kind of leads to a problem with producing therapies.
Right.
And then do you have any idea what this means for the mortality and survival rate for this specific illness?
Based on what you said, it sounds like it's pretty high at this point. I mean, you said there's been, what did you say, 200 or 500 cases?
Yeah, I think it's 595.
595. Are any of those living?
Some are. It kind of. I didn't necessarily go into the specifics of per case. I mean, and this is since its discovery in 1967.
Wow.
There's been, and a lot of it's in Africa. So it seems that it might be kind of, I guess, healthcare related. Like they don't have the best options for even the supportive treatment in some areas.
Right.
But actually, the death rate is about 50 to 90% for most cases.
Yeah.
And the cases that do, the few people that did have survived it, they never made it to the stages where you would get, because, and I think it's the kind of second, there are 3 kind of stages of the disease. Once you get past the second, there's kind of no going back. After you start to get, the fever gets really bad, and you get, once they develop a rash, so, for the most part, it's once you get to the point of recognizing it, it tends to be too late, and that you're very close to getting to the, multi-system organ failure and the deadly aspects of the disease.
And the massive hemorrhaging and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And anytime you ever hear of anything being hemolytic, believe it or not, the cells in your body contain a lot of nasty things. That's why they're in cells, partly. That's the mechanism they work. And when your body a cell dies, it has a way of, it's called apoptosis. You've probably seen that. That's how it eats the cell and digests those pieces. When the cell just breaks open and that stuff gets in the system, a few of them, it's okay if you get in an accident or get hit or pounded or fall down. Some of that does break open, and that your body can deal with it. But when you have massive cell hemolysis, it usually is. It's so damaging to your liver and your kidney, especially your liver, and it just starts attacking every organ, and it just becomes. It's like releasing the poison inside those cells into the rest of it. That sounds what it gets to that point.
Yeah.
There's no going back.
Yeah, it's definitely not good. And so, like we said, because there are no treatments, obviously that means that there are also no like vaccinations or antibiotics or. No, antibiotics or antivirals, that work on it. So, as far as like preventing spread of the disease, it is really virulent. So, if it gets into the population, it can be really, really deadly. But because it's not super prevalent, that hasn't been a huge issue. But for the most part, patients are just isolated when they have it, and healthcare professionals have to wear like PPE to make sure that they aren't coming in contact with any of those fluids and stuff, because it is so contagious once it's developed. Do you have any questions for us about
Just a couple. I mean, because just so you know, when you talk about Africa, it's such a large continent. You know, it's not one country. Is it north, south,
It said
central?
It said the
I think it was different countries. So it was like Angola,
Kenya.
Okay.
Oh,
I thought it said something about the Congo.
yeah, they definitely did.
Yeah, the Congo. But it was just a few like places in Africa, but it wasn't because it's not super prevalent. So
because it said as compared to Ebola, which is normally more prevalent in I think it said humid rainforest. This is kind of the Marburg virus is more prevalent in I guess arid woodlands is what it said. So kind of I guess areas that would be more like that type of situation.
Probably conducive for bat populations to survive, not only in caves but in what they were going to eat and all that. So, oh, that's cool. I guess the only other thing is, have any of the cases come to the U.S.? Have they seen anything like that here?
Actually, one individual in 2008 developed Marburg virus. Well, contracted it after visiting. I don't remember exactly which cave, but it was a cave in Africa. I'm not sure which country exactly, but I'm pretty sure this individual made it. But there was also another hiker that same year from a different country who also visited the same cave, and he did not make it.
Wow. I'm wondering if they're, and I know that that's how it is when these tough diseases. I'm sorry, it's so hot in here. I feel like I'm about to explode. Excuse me, I'm turning. There's no heat coming out of that. I need some air. Sorry. Maybe an old man is making too much heat. But no, I guess the only other question I have is that because I'd never heard about it, is there much published literature about this?
It seems like there was a decent amount of literature, but it almost seemed like there wasn't much research really at all going into
That sounds
making
scary,
treatments.
doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah, because it does require such high precautions in order to study it and to test it. But there seemed to be decent literature on it, but there just isn't much to go off of because they don't know a lot.
Do you think that's the only reason that there's not a lot of research going on this is just because of the safety?
Well, I mean, it's also, I'm sure the area of the world that it's in makes a difference.
What else could be a problem? Why aren't they working on this? Why do people usually work on things?
It's worth money.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in the end, I mean, not only do we have national crisis that could happen out there, but I would wonder if there's, it's only this many, and we're not going to be able to. It's years before they sometimes come up with a vaccine or something like that, and then someone has to be willing to spend money on that. Ebola, once that started going all over the place, money started coming into it, people started researching it. Well, without that sort of investment,
They have
I think that's one of them things.
motivation.
What sort of resources did you use to look this up?
I really like Up to Date. Actually, I find a lot of good articles from there. And Access Pharmacy.
We use Lipicot.
Yeah, the same book that we have for our microbiology class.
Okay.
We use that as well, which had some good information, especially about the family of viruses.
Like the World Health Organization has some good stuff about
Okay. Good.
like specific cases also.
You can get a lot more primary literature there because
Yeah.
you're talking about tertiary sources of
Yeah.
literature, which sometimes up to date does not mean it's
Yeah.
up to date.
Yeah.
You know, it does mean it's good, and you'll find most physicians look at that first, or providers they look at that first, and you're thinking, where'd you get your information? You're like, I look on up to date. Well, that's going to be 2-3 years old.
Yeah.
You know, so the other places you should do is either a PubMed search or an Ovid search. You know, you guys, I don't know how much information you've used that way, but look online for primary literature. WHO has a lot of primary links to literature. That the WHO. The other source that you should consider. CDC.
We actually did use them as well.
Yeah,
You did,
we used
okay.
that
I was
source.
guessing you would. Any sort of health or viral, bacterial, any sort of health issues that are out there, the CDC is a great one. You just have to know how to navigate it. When you figure around with it first, you're like, it's just too much stuff, you know. But then you start realizing where you can look there, and that will really help you.
Yeah.
So, what did this make you think? How do you feel about this yourself?
I mean, I'm not going into any caves anytime soon. I didn't like caves to begin with, but now I definitely don't like them.
No spelunking for you.
Yeah,
huh?
no.
I actually had never heard of anything that was as severe as Ebola. So it was kind of interesting learning about these very dangerous and severe conditions.
And it wasn't one that we had gone over in our class so we didn't really have a baseline of it when we got assigned it. So it was cool to look up one that we didn't actually know anything about.
So you got assigned it. I was just going to ask you, how did you choose it?
Yeah, we didn't, it was like a random.
Interesting. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one last question I would ask both of you, because one day you'll both be pharmacists and you're going to be out there either vaccinating or talking to people about vaccinations, because you are going to be one of the trusted professions out there and people are going to look to you. How do you feel about vaccines?
I am 100% pro-vaccine.
Yeah? And how are you going to talk other people into them when they are not? Because a lot of the population now is fighting it. And why do you think they fight it?
I think it's probably literature that just has no actual research behind it. And some people also just like to go against what are the norms. They like to not conform. I mean, it might even be like religious reasons or thinking that the vaccines might not actually work. It's kind of just it's a tricky topic for people who don't see eye to eye on the topic, I would suppose.
That's great. So when you think about being a pharmacist one day and they ask you, is this 100% safe?
I mean, nothing is 100% safe. I mean, I think that's just one of the things that you have to accept in all of life and every decision that you make. But always that the benefits outweigh the risks.
Right.
Is really what it comes down to for me. That like, if you really, really dig into the research, you're going to be much better off having vaccinated than if you were to kind of risk it by not.
Right.
So
there are things such as I was telling the last two students, there is something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. I've never heard of that. It's a neurological thing that can happen from almost any. It's happened with flu vaccines, a lot of different, vaccines usually happens to adults when they lose sensation in the bottom half of their body and actually can't walk for a while. And in most cases it corrects itself, but it's a very scary situation with someone, I'm never taking a flu shot again. You said that isn't necessarily a total link, but it did happen after the flu shot or after a Hep B shot or whatever there might be out there. But it'll be a challenge for you. I mean, you think back to tell me again the name again, Marburg's. I'll never have that right. Marburg's. The Marburg guy.
Yeah.
Marburg's disease, Marburg's virus, if those people had a vaccine, if there's a vaccine, if this starts to get growing at all, a vaccine is critical.
Yeah.
Just like polio was, just like smallpox for our Native Americans, just like for so many of our population, if they didn't have vaccines.
Yeah.
And you'll learn you're going to have babies that are going to suddenly haven't been vaccinated because their parents don't believe it and they're sick. And you have to know how to treat them differently than a patient who has been vaccinated. There is a difference in the the antibiotics you use, everything. So
Mhm.
anyway, I'm sorry to be lecturing you. This is about you guys. But I think it's good stuff to learn, and as you guys move on, think about viruses, and then you also have to think about people, how they want to treat a virus. Everybody wants an antibiotic.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it can't lead into a bacterial infection with a
Mhm.
viral infection, but you'll learn more about this. I don't have to say it now. But, so I enjoyed this. This was good. It was good to. I know I'll forget Marburg's disease.
Virus.
Virus. Thank you. Jeez. You know, I'm definitely can't remember from 1 minute to the next, but it was interesting. Very interesting to hear that. There's a lot of cool things that are happening out there, and things that'll pop up. Ebola happened way after when I was in school.
Yeah.
They said, "Oh, there's this," and they also had flesh-eating bacteria that
Mhm.
cropped up. Probably a third the way into my career, and it was like, wow, where's all this stuff coming from? You know, so there's new things like that all the time. And, well, good.
Yeah.
Anything else you need from me?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. It was
Thank
great.